Hey guys, Alex Kubasek here. Whether you're advertising on TikTok, Snapchat, Google, Facebook, Instagram, it does not matter. There are certain things that you need to keep an eye out for to make sure that you're spending your money wisely. And it doesn't matter necessarily how much or how little you're spending. Today, we're going to be going over specifically how to budget for your Facebook or your Google or your Instagram or whatever campaigns they are online, and what key performance indicators you need to be looking out for to make sure that you're being successful. So do me a favor, click the link and come in with us and we'll show you exactly how to get it done.
3, 2, 1.
When you want your leads and sales on autopilot and to accelerate your business, you come to the source. The ConvertSource podcast with Alex Kubasek. Let's go.
Hey, everybody. This is Alex Kubasek here with ConvertSource. On this week's podcast, we're going to be going over specifically how to budget for your ad campaigns online. So many times companies think and they make the grave mistake of, you need to spend all this money. Well, actually, you don't necessarily need to do that. Now, a little disclaimer here. There are so many people out there that are going to say you could spend as little as $2 a day. Let me assure you that is not necessarily the case either. There are times where you can do that with certain objectives and optimizations on Facebook. And in later podcasts, we're going to be going over specifically how to build out those things and what to do and how to do it, etc. But today we're going to be focusing specifically on budgeting and how to budget. I'm going to be putting some resources down below or wherever the comments are on here or description, what have you, for you to be able to actually look at in a real-time situation. If I want to spend this, here are the rough results I'm going to be getting. If I want to spend this, here are the rough results I'm going to be getting. Really just giving you a bigger picture of how to budget and realistically, based on your goals, what targets you need to hit in order to be able to hit your goal, whether it's revenue, leads, whatever it might be. There are going to be some resources that I'm going to put below so that you can actually put into application what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. One of the biggest things that I get asked all the time is, how much do I need to be spending on my Facebook ads? It's definitely a subjective type of conversation. And also it can be an objective type situation. It's really all dependent, and this is really what I come back with. It's dependent on your goals. It's not necessarily, because so many people come at it from, okay, I'm new to the online advertising space. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing. How much do I need to be spending to be a kaboominaire yesterday? You're looking at it from completely the wrong way, let me assure you. What you need to be doing is you need to think of your end goal first, and you need to say, okay, here is my goal, X, Y, and Z. And you need to start working backwards. You need to start factoring in what your product is, how much it costs for you to actually create that product, what would make it so that you would break even in terms of like your ad spend, or in terms of like, for example, if you're working with an agency as well, what is your ad spend for Facebook? And then on top of that, factor in what the agency cost is to know if I want to hit these particular targets in terms of sales, leads, etc. What is it going to cost per lead to be, or per sale, etc., to be profitable, factoring on all of those expenses. So it's not too much different really than traditional advertising. Except in this case, if you're selling something, it's called ROAS, return on ad spend. In the traditional marketing world, it's considered ROI, return on investment. So there are a lot of different ways to look at it, but the number one thing that you need to do before you click submit or launch or whatever platform it is to start running digital advertising, you must always think about your end goal in mind first. What is your target? What is your goal? What are you trying to achieve with some form of online advertising outlet? And the reason why you need to do that is because you need a point B. If you're a point A, you need a point B to be able to say, okay, this is where I want to be. This is where I'm starting. And if I'm going to be starting backwards from what my goal is, so I can factor in all my costs, agency fees, if you have them, etc., those are going to be your milestones, your mile markers to be able to say, okay, here is how I'm profitable. Here is how I'm not profitable. Where are we dropping off within the funnel to make it so that I'm not hitting my targets? sometimes, more often than not, if you don't look at your goal or your end target in mind first, you're going to start thinking that your advertising isn't working. Because what might be showing up on like the Facebook ads manager, by the way, for those of you who don't know, that's where you run your Facebook ads out of. And if you have an Instagram page or an Instagram account for your business, you can link the two of those up so that you're running on both platforms simultaneously through one business manager. That's just a very short, in a nutshell, what that is. Now, with people who don't think about their targets in mind, as I was mentioning before, if they look at their ad manager, for example, and they see that their ROAS, or return on ad spend, is only a 0.8 versus like, and let's say that their break even point is a 1.2 return on ad spend. And really all return on ad spend is the amount of profit that you've made divided by your spend. And that's how you get your ROAS. If you want to make $20,000 in a month and you spent 10 grand on ads, you have a 2 ROAS. It's that simple. So in this case, if you're inside your ad manager and you see a 0.8, but your ROAS target is a 1.2, that means you're 0.4 ROAS points off, right? So that being the case, you might think, oh my gosh, these ads aren't working. But what you don't necessarily realize is that inside your funnel, maybe you might have an intro offer and then an upsell, maybe a downsell for somebody who didn't take the upsell. But either way, you might have all these other services that inside your funnel that might be converting and making you more money. But you always need to look within your end all be all, where your customers actually end up. Because what that might be saying is, if, for example, your pixels, and all pixels are just tags to basically say, hey, this particular person hit this page, it means that they either became a lead or they purchased something of, this, that, and the other thing, and it was this value. That's all a pixel is. It's basically just telling you when they hit this page. And of course, for those of you out there who are listening who are a little bit more advanced, of course, we can go much deeper into the Facebook or whichever pixel tag, whatever you want to call it, or whichever platform it's on. But in terms of this particular conversation, let's just focus on, in order for somebody to actually start to see that value report back in like the Facebook ads manager, for example, you need to make sure that your pixels or your tags are set up appropriately. So if your platform, if your automated system, which is really all this podcast is about, putting your leads and sales on autopilot, if your system has leaks, or if it has chinks in the armor, or if it has breaks in the piping, it's not going to report back accurately to your ad instance, whether it's Facebook, Google, TikTok, whatever. And so what you might start to find is, and of course, this is just a scenario, there are millions of them out there, but you might say, okay, well, Facebook is only reporting that I'm making a 0.8 ROAS, but really if you look inside your CRM, for example, and you see, okay, but inside here, I'm showing that I'm at a 1.8 ROAS. What's the disconfiguration? Now you know that it's most likely your pixel issue. And so that's like a quick troubleshooting item. But that's not always going to be the case because, of course, if you're in the e-com space, things like Shopify or BigCommerce or things like that, they have direct integrations to where they'll be able to place those tags for you. If you're in the lead space, it's very simple. Facebook gives you a pixel, and then it gives you what's called an event code. So basically what you would do is if you have somebody that comes to your landing page, your base pixel will fire, okay? So that means that it's just telling Facebook, hey, somebody came to my landing page from my ad. That's all. And this is the same really for any ad platform. That particular pixel is going to fire and say, hey, somebody viewed your landing page, your content. And then if they become a lead, let's say that your KPI is leads. Let's say that your goal is as many leads as humanly possible. Well, all you would do is you would just take what's called the lead snippet, lead event code, however you want to pronounce it, say it. There's so many different terms. But you would just put that simple string of code on the page that they come to after they submit the form or become a lead or take that action. And what it will do is it will then fire that particular pixel saying, hey, Facebook, I got a lead. as simple as that. So now that we're looking at it in terms of like the actual actions, whether somebody bought something, a pixel will fire and say, hey, somebody bought something for this value. It will then come back and tell Facebook or Google or whomever, you just received a sale or a lead for this cost per acquisition. So cost per actually achieving that action, or CPA or CT, whatever. And then it will also tell like Facebook or whatever, here's how much it was worth, or here's how much the lead cost to get. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you need to know your numbers. Of course, the first thing, number one on the list across the board, is you need to know your target. You need to know what is that one thing? What's that unicorn? What's that pie in the sky? What's my target that I need to hit or that I want to hit? And then number two is you need to know your numbers. You need to know how much you can afford per lead or per sale, or in other words, cost per acquisition, to be profitable, or to make it so that your lead generation campaign, for example, because you don't necessarily have like a sale ROAS component up front, because when you get a lead, you have to pass it off to your sales team, etc. You need to make sure that you know your numbers. You need to say, okay, if I spend $1,000 a month on advertising, I need to hit a cost per lead or cost per sale, CPA, of X to be profitable. So you need to know your numbers. Number one, you got to know your target. You got to know what you're looking for. And then next on the list is you have to know your numbers. You have to know what your cost per acquisition can be at its highest to make sure that you're profitable. More things on this in terms of the KPIs that we actually have to look at. And then we're going to get into like some resources about specifically how, like these things to plug in and give you some estimates to know, here's what I can forecast and project. So in this case, another big thing that we want to make sure that we're looking out for in terms of on specifically an ad platform. Let's just take Facebook, for example, because everybody is really hot about Facebook and Instagram advertising. Now, just so that you're aware, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat, those are different advertising platforms than a Google, for example. One is social advertising platforms, and then the other one is PPC, Google Pay Per, those types of things. Google is going to be where you have a question. And if you didn't listen to last week's podcast, go ahead, go back and listen to it. One problem or one question, and you're going to Google for that one solution. Okay, so there's going to be content that comes up when you go to Google and you say best or keto brownie recipes. Now, the most optimized in terms of search engine optimization from last week's podcast, that is going to come up first. The one that is optimized the most by Google standards, search engine standards, so search engine optimization. Above that, you're going to have people who are bidding, so they are paying money in a bid for keywords and key phrases such as best or healthiest keto brownie recipes. In this case, if they spent the most money and their keywords are correct in terms of their target, the people that they want to reach, because they know that these people are searching for this particular keyword or key phrase, they spend the most money, or they spend an adequate amount of money to bid, to win the bid, to be able to come up first. They will come up at the top of Google, and you'll see the little ad icon next to those results. And so the person who shows up on top, they won the bid for that search. So that's how that works. Now, that's very one problem, one solution. So that is an answer to somebody's question. We pay to answer that question, basically, to get in front of them the most. Your costs are going to be, and your KPIs are going to be a little bit different because this is a bid environment. And of course, I don't want to go too far into this because that's not what today's podcast is about, because today we're talking about budgeting and how to budget for these things. But like I said, you have to know your numbers. So here, your cost per click is going to be, if you win the bid, it's going to be, X, it's going to be a little bit higher than like social advertising, for example. Your click-through rate, if you bid correctly and your targeting is appropriate, your click-through rate is probably going to be a lot higher on Google than on like social, for example. Of course, there are always certain extenuating circumstances where it might be a little bit different, but in this case, it's usually going to be a little bit higher. But your cost per acquisition is probably going to be higher than that of on a social ad platform. So, for example, if we're comparing, let's just say for just an example, if we're trying to compare a Google CPA or cost per lead, cost per acquisition for a lead campaign, lead generation, conversion. And then we're also doing the same thing on Facebook. And let's say we're looking at it from the scope of, say, to know which platform is giving me the cheapest cost per lead. Facebook is usually, or social advertising is usually going to be a lot less than Google, for example. Because Google, you're bidding, you're competing. And in this case, the highest bidder wins, obviously. That means that sometimes your cost might be a little bit higher because you had to spend more to win that keyword or key phrase. Whereas in this case, for like social, so like on Facebook or Instagram, for example, if you're looking to get that same lead and it's roughly the same content, that you're advertising, same landing page, you're probably going to get a little bit cheaper because you have a lot of targeting capability. There are a lot of things that you can do. Social is normally just cheaper for an acquisition. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily understand that because social advertising is a pattern interrupter. It's a scroll stopper. But if the targeting is correct, and if you need to know more about targeting, you can go to the customer avatar or persona podcast a couple of weeks ago. And that's another thing I want you guys to know. A lot of these episodes are very continuous or continuous of another, so that it like helps you on your ladder so that the last week feeds into the next week. Does that make sense? So it's always really good to listen to these in kind of like order, just so that you get the most out of it. For those of you who are kind of coming in like mid, kind of launch of podcast, for example. But Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, those are pattern interrupters. Those are scroll stoppers. Your content, and in this case, the algorithms are very much favoring video, and they have been for a long time, and it's only getting more so. But your video needs to be the most captivating to get somebody to stop. Now, in this case, that is where these two particular types of advertising vastly differ. One is one problem, one solution, Google or Bing, etc. The other is I'm targeting somebody who, instead of like on Google where I'm saying I am going to bid on the keyword phrase of best keto brownie recipes. Now on social, I can't really bid on best keto brownie recipes. So I need to get really clever with my targeting, which is why my customer persona or avatar needs to be so on point. And I need to know what blogs they're reading. I need to know what websites that they currently hang out on. I need to know interests, things like that, so that I can target those for my ad spend. So I have my budget, my campaign budget, which we'll get to momentarily. I have my campaign budget, and I'm distributing that budget across, that ad spend across these interests or these different targeting options. So obviously, what I might target for that is like the top rated keto influencers or the top rated keto blogs or websites, those types of things, so that I can make sure that I am targeting a very relevant audience. So hopefully that makes sense. Of course, if you guys ever have questions, please just reach out, support@convertsource.com. If you have questions about a particular episode, or if there's something that you want to hear, please reach out, support@convertsource.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as humanly possible. And maybe we'll even feature you on the show so that, we can really dive into your question, because of course, as we all know, if one person has a question, there is a good chance that others do too. So in this case, now let's get to actual ad budgeting. Now that you have kind of like a background of the different platforms, how they cost differently, even though they're all online, now that you have kind of like an understanding of that, let's talk about actual budgeting. So often there are quote unquote gurus out there that say you could spend as little as $2 on a Facebook campaign to start advertising. Now, of course, to business owners who really want to get their name out there and who really want to start growing their business, they're going to think, well, hell, I'm spending this much on radio or traditional TV or on newspaper, etc. And they're telling me that I can spend $2 a day on Facebook and I'm going to be rich. Please erase that from your mind because that is not true. The fact is that you can spend as little as $2 a day on Facebook, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to be a millionaire with spending $2 a day. And here is where your target and knowing your numbers really comes into play. So on this particular episode, in the description, I've put specifically some calculators and benchmark resources, benchmarks as in key performance indicators, things that, and they're broken down per industry. And I've got them there so that you know that at this particular time, based on your industry, here are the KPIs that you should be hitting to be successful on these platforms. So in this case, I've also paired that with a calculator for your ads. This is going to make it so that you can start to forecast, hey, guys, if our target is this, here's how much we need to spend on advertising. If our target is this, here's how much. If our target is this, here's how much. And then the rough KPIs or benchmarks that you need to hit to make sure that you get to that point at current advertising costs. It's really important because back in the day, these things did not exist. And it was kind of like the spray and pray method of, okay, I need to spend this much and let's just see how it goes. Here, with these particular resources and benchmarks and things of that nature, you can really start to kind of funnel and zero into, okay, if I want to make this much, here are my numbers that I need to hit. It gives you a little bit of a heads up to know your cost per acquisition can't be any more than this to hit this target. So in a sense, I saved you all the guesswork in going and hunting those things down. And honestly, my best advice that I could give somebody new to advertising online is go with the simplest calculation possible. Because there are so many calculators out there that are going to say, what is your this, and this? If you're new to this stuff, you don't know those things yet. Or you might even have a little bit of an idea, but if it's not kind of like tried and true, you're going to end up disappointing yourself. So do yourself a favor. And if you're going to use another calculator, for example, find the simplest one possible. That's one of the biggest things that I can say, because so many times people look for resources and they end up going down this crazy rabbit hole because they don't know, they might not know their numbers or what markers they need to hit because they're so new to this. And then they start going down these rabbit holes saying, all right, I need to figure this out. I need to figure this out. I need to figure this out. And you know what the worst part about and the worst outcome of all of that is? They never end up launching their campaign, or worse, they end up wasting money because they're like, I'm just too bogged down by this. I'm just going to launch it and see what happens. I highly recommend not going too far into the numbers and still launching, but have an understanding of at least knowing I don't want to risk any more than this in order to get my profit or my lead target, etc. At least know that. That way you'll launch the campaign, you'll be able to watch the campaigns with, that mind's eye of saying, okay, I just got my first 5 leads. On an average of those 5 leads, I hit this. And so I know that I can say kind of lead over lead, I'm right in my target. Now, also understand there is going to be some variance from time to time. It's going to, you're going to have a couple of days where you might hit your lead at like $10 over, and then you're going to have, days where you hit your leads at $10 under. And so that'll start to even out as the campaigns start to get smarter. The more conversions, leads or sales that you put into the algorithm, the more it's going to learn, which is what's called the learning phase in these platforms. so that the campaigns can get smarter and make sure that they're only putting these ads and their most successful ad components in front of the people who are most likely to convert with us, but also at the cheapest cost per acquisition or cost per lead, cost per sale, etc. And this is really important because the more data we give it. So like, for example, if knowledge is power, that's a really common saying. We need to do the exact same thing for the algorithm. We need to teach it more successful sales leads, more successful KPIs or benchmarks, so that it can start to make sure that it's going more down the smarter path versus, just the spray and pray path. I hope that makes sense to everybody. And of course, again, if you have questions, support@convertsource.com. We're happy to answer all your questions. So with these resources, these calculators, these benchmarks that I'm going to be putting in the description here, I highly implore you, play around with them. Be really optimistic and ambitious and, put in $1 million if you want. But also do your worst case scenario too. You definitely want to understand and know that if another iOS 14 happens, and just for those of you who don't know, iOS 14 was Apple's tracking update that really slapped Facebook across the face and basically said, you're not going to be able to track nearly as many people as you wanted or that you were able to before, because we're giving the Apple users the ability to opt out of tracking. So it won't be as accurate. Now, there are third-party platforms, but if that's starting to stretch, your budget allowance for this, these particular campaigns or this avenue, that's totally fine. What I would say is at least then have a bottom rung. What is the worst these campaigns can perform to where I'm still making sure that I'm not wasting money or losing money? You got to know that too. Because that way, then you're going to be able to say, okay, if I'm within these barriers, I know I'm successful right now. I know that I'm profitable. These are also good things to have. Like, let's say that you work with an agency. These are also really good things to present to that agency, to give them those parameters to make sure that they don't fall below your bottom level. It's really important so that they know how to optimize your campaigns to stay above that bottom rung. Hopefully that makes sense. So I really would go through and try a bunch of these different exercises, and do yourself a favor, go to the benchmarks in one of the resources I'm going to put in the description here, or wherever it is on this particular platform, and look at your specific industry, plug it into the calculator based on how much you want to make, how much you're willing to spend, and things like that. And you're going to start to get spit out like this, great, let's just call it campaign tracker. And you're going to know specifically, here's what I got to hit to be profitable. Here's what I got to hit to make sure that I'm not losing money. And also, you're going to start to understand your target audience a lot better, because there are certain times, and even past your target audience, you're going to start to understand your competitors too. And this is a big one, because if, for example, on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, let's say social advertising, if your cost per click, so the amount it costs for somebody to click on your ad, if it is, let's say that your target industry, let's say that your benchmark is to be, let's say $1.50. It costs $1.50 in your market for, on average, for somebody, or is the average amount spent in your industry for somebody to click on your ad. Let's say it was $1.50. And let's say that your average click-through rate, the percentage of people who see your ad that click through to your landing page, let's say that your industry average was 2%. Now, roughly speaking, anything above 1% is considered to be usually successful on in terms of Facebook's mind's eye. So let's say that your industry standard was 2%, and your industry standard benchmark for your cost per click was $1.50. Well, let's say that you're hitting a 4% click-through rate, which is great. That means that you're double the click-through rate of people that are in your industry, and the average numbers they're achieving means that a lot of people like what they're seeing. It's very relevant to them, which means that you're targeting the right people. But let's say also, instead of being $1.50 for your cost per click, let's say you're hitting $3 for your cost per click and still 4% for your click-through rate. Well, you're probably thinking, this is confusing. I'm doing really well and people are clicking through, but I'm also being charged more than the industry standard. So is my ad not working? Not true. What that means is that you're digging in the same oil field as your competitor. And so if right now you both are spending the same amount of money, so you're drilling with the exact same drill in the same place, in this case, there are things that you can do that you don't necessarily need to spend more money, right? You can do different like types of objective targeting, or you can build your campaigns a little bit differently. I try to make sure that we don't ask our clients for more money before we've exhausted all other options, because that's always an awkward conversation. But there are other things that you can do, and of course we won't go into that today, just because this is strictly for budgeting and KPIs. But of course, support at ConvertSource.com. If you want to hear something more about that, definitely let us know. But in this case, a high click or cost per click and a high click-through rate means that this is a saturated place. You're targeting the right people, but it's very saturated. What I would recommend doing, if you're doing this by yourself, just to make sure that this isn't kind of like a fluke, or this isn't like a, some flash in the pan type of thing, I would update my budget to spend a little bit more. This is one way of doing it. And this is only really if you're very green to this, right? There are so many, seasoned advertisers out there and a ton of different things to do. But in this case, spend just a little bit more per day. See if you can drop your cost per click down even just a little bit, keep your click-through rate around the same percentage, and then you'll know there's your answer. I might need to spend a little bit more money or have a bigger drill to win here, to get to the oil first. Now, there are other methods that you can do, and all of this plays into your budgeting, mind you. This is where having those numbers of, here is the very worst I can do to still be profitable, etc. Here's, the numbers of the very best that I want to do, and here's the numbers I need to hit to get there. This is how you'll be able to stay within that particular field, if you will, that particular space of spend. You'll know, okay, I've got a little bit more that I can kind of, put into the fire. And so if you know that, hey, I've dropped, in cost per click, but my click-through rate's still pretty high, we were able to get some more sales or leads, et cetera. We were able to drop our lead cost or our cost per sale a little bit. Those are numbers that you can then rationalize and say, okay, if I drop this much fuel, so let's just say ad spend, into the machine, my system that's automating my leads and sales. If I drop this much fuel or spend into my engine, I know that I'm going to get X, or excuse me, if I drop X in, I know I'm going to get Y out. And so whenever you start to create that formula, you're now making it so that I can project month over month, week over week, quarter over quarter, year over year, etc., with things being pretty equal, that I can spend X and I can get Y. Now, that means that you can start to test the waters a little bit. So you can say, okay, my drill is now this big, my competitor's drill is only this big now. If I really want to bully them out of the space, I need a drill that's probably going to be about this big versus this big. And so you can profitably, right? Because that's what matters. You can profitably start to edge out your competition while still maintaining your numbers, still maintaining your profitability, still increasing your sales flow, lead flow, etc. And you're going to do it a little bit slower so you're not overextending yourself, so you can keep your eye on the market and your numbers and your competition, but you're doing all of this profitably. And you're doing all of this while being within the parameters or in the scope of, here's the best that I can do, or here are those numbers. Here's the worst I can do and stay profitable, and here are those numbers. numbers. It's very important. So you can see how this entire conversation is really building up to staying profitable, being able to make it so that you're going to be the top person in your space and stay profitable, how to be a little bit more competitive, what to keep your eyes on so that you can remain profitable while being competitive. And hey, I mean, there might be times that you literally don't have any competition, which is fantastic. Um, and you might be able to spend like next to nothing to be successful. The problem is that if you had that idea, somebody else might have that idea for that product or service as well. And so when they come knocking on the door in the space, you need to make sure that you know your numbers and say, okay, we've got a little bit of competition. Here's the highest we can go in terms of our ad spend to be profitable. Here's the worst. So you can see how you're always going to have that compass, that scope to know here's what needs to be done in the worst case scenario. Here's what can be done in the best case scenario. And it's really important to know all these things ahead of you launching your advertising. Now, like I said, you can launch your ads with some minimal numbers in mind so that you can start to learn your market and your actual KPIs or benchmarks. But I would wholeheartedly recommend keeping your eye on those numbers so that you can continue to stay profitable in a non-saturated market or a very saturated market. So keep your eye on those things and make sure that you use these resources to your benefit, the things that I'm going to put in the link down below. And if you have more specific questions, and let's say that you've already reached out to us, support@convertsource.com, and let's say that in the meantime, you need a quicker answer, do yourself a favor. Take the resources that we've basically supplied you with and start to play around and say, okay, I need a Google ad budget calculator. I need a TikTok ad budget calculator. And you're going to start to be able to find these resources that you can start to tug on to make sure that before you engage in launching your first campaign or before you engage with an agency, you'll know your numbers. It's like going into your doctor's office and saying, all right, well, I'm not really happy about this because I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't have a clue, but I know I've got this, and this symptoms. So I can go in there and I can have a more educated conversation with him. Because whenever he asks me, what are my symptoms? I know exactly what they are. I know exactly what I'm feeling. I know all the medications I've taken. What do you think we should do, doc? It's knowing your numbers. It's knowing your situation. It's knowing your target. I want to feel better, and being able to work backwards. And he'll ask questions like, what are your symptoms? What are the medications you've taken so far? What are medications you're currently on so that nothing like conflicts? It's the exact same thing. Excuse me. This is all part of that buyer psychology. So if you did not listen to the customer persona or avatar podcast, please, I implore you, make sure that you listen to it and then come back to this one. Because everything we talk about builds on the other or on the previous, or it somehow intersects with another show. Because this whole thing is about building an automated leads and sales engine so that you can be sleeping on vacation, spending time with your family, etc., knowing that your business can run with or without you. Because you know your numbers, you know how to hit them, you know your target persona, you know your product. And so whenever you put all those things into these digital advertising outlets, you'll know, as long as I'm hitting these targets and these benchmarks and KPIs, I am profitable and I can grow and my business is doing well. And then you'll also know that if I put X dollars into the machine, I'm going to get out Y revenue or Y leads. And so when you know that formula, you're then able to say, all right, well, roughly speaking, if I increase my X or my spend by, another 20%, I'm going to roughly get another 20% in sales or leads, right? So you can start to really be able to kind of become your own bank a little bit. The general rule of thumb is if you're in, say, like if you're selling a product and you're at a 2 ROAS or better, you're your own bank, because for every dollar you drop in, you're going to get 2 out. for, let's say, you know exactly how much just the lowest lead value is. So the lowest that a lead is worth to you, let's say it was $100. Well, you know that if you drop in X and you get out $100, you can say, all right, well, if I spend 20% more, you know, you're going to get $120. So you can start to see how you can start to incrementally increase your revenue based on the data, or your leads based on the data and the numbers. With like traditional advertising, you don't necessarily know these things. Yeah, they're introducing different ways to track. Like, for example, with billboards, I know that every X amount of cars roughly drives past this billboard. I can tell you that you're going to get this amount of, you know, eyeball time, or, you know, that type of thing. But it doesn't necessarily have a funneled, numerical, data-driven approach that gets smarter as the campaign goes. And so that, excuse me, that's the 100% reason why I always recommend to people digital advertising. Whether it's through display, whether it's through social, social advertising, or whether it's through, you know, Google search, things like that. Whatever it is, advertise your business online. Get some good market feedback. You're going to be spending a whole heck of a lot less. So, and the other thing that I recommend in terms of, all right, well, I really want to do this, but I don't necessarily have the budget. Look at your lowest performing marketing and advertising outlet currently within your business. What is hanging on by a thread? Take that and reallocate it toward this. That way you're not spending any more, so you don't need to, you know, talk to anybody, or you don't have to worry about going back to the bank and asking for more, or however you derive your ad spend or your budgeting. And this way, you're no worse out in terms of spending any more, any little money. If it doesn't perform as well from the first time, it's not going to hurt you either, because it was all these funds were already not performing over here. We're not spending any more money, but we're trying a new avenue that most likely, based on all of the things that the ConvertSource podcast gave you, all of these shows to help you to make it so that you're profitable, or that you've got a great lead flow with ideal customers that you want to do business with, it's going to make it so that you're far more profitable than you ever were before. So I implore you, listen to this podcast as many times as you have to make sure that you're looking at your numbers. Because like I said in the beginning, it's not necessarily about your budget per se. It's about your numbers. So whenever you use like these calculators, or you look at these benchmarks, they're going to help you develop your daily spend or your monthly spend or whatever. But I would more importantly say to you, look at your target, know your numbers, use these resources, understand your customer avatar or persona, and make sure that you have tracking in place to be able to track your customer's journey so that you can speak to them in a more educated fashion. So you can see how all of these components are starting to put your leads and sales on autopilot, give you an engine to automate your business. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the show today, or watching it if you're on YouTube or wherever. We come at you every single week on Tuesdays. And I cannot thank you enough for being a part of this, journey. I wish you all the success in the world. If you guys ever have any questions, support@convertsource.com. Please reach out to us. We want to help you. Our goal is to hit 31 million businesses and help as many people as we possibly can with our message. And we want to help you folks. We want to make you successful. That is a metric. That is a KPI that we measure ourselves by. How many people are we helping? How many companies are we growing? How many people are we impacting in a positive fashion with our message? That is one of our KPIs and our benchmarks. So please, tell us how we're doing. Support@convertsource.com. If you need help with your business, reach out to us. Support@convertsource.com. Let us know how we can help you. Let's jump on a call. Whatever you guys need, please let us know how we can help you. Thank you so much for watching this or listening to this. God bless. Be great. I want the very best for you, your business, your family, and your lives, and we want to help you get there. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next week.
When you want your leads and sales on autopilot and to accelerate your business, you come to the source. The ConvertSource podcast with Alex Kubasek. Let's go.